No. So the question is, how do you value Bitcoin?
How do I value Bitcoin?
Yeah. What's the metric for its value?
In my opinion, the value is that it's a completely decentralized network. No one can control it. And you can send money to anybody, anywhere, whenever you want. And no one will ever, and I mean that, no one will ever be able to stop you from doing that.
No, I agree.
That's the biggest value proposition.
I guess I didn't mean value in a sort of abstract sense. I meant
Okay?
value in terms of how do you measure the actual value of one Bitcoin?
Isn't like the price.
Right, that's it. How do you value that?
It's supply and demand. It's like with any asset.
Right.
We have exchanges online which measure this based on how many buy orders are there and how many sell orders are there.
But isn't it the case that these exchanges and so on, they value Bitcoin according to how much it's worth in fiat?
Yes.
So isn't that the real underlying value of Bitcoin? However much it's worth in fiat.
How much
So,
it's worth in fiat is
yeah.
yes. That's currently how we trade its value. Yes.
Because if one Bitcoin was worth one penny, Bitcoin wouldn't have any value.
Sure.
So
It would have very little value. Yeah.
isn't it just a good like homes or like coffee or whatever? It simply is determined by how much you can buy or sell in fiat. So it doesn't have any inherent value of its own.
It's measured in fiat. It's measured in dollars primarily because it's currently the world's reserve
Sure,
asset.
yeah.
But it doesn't have to be. I mean, that's just the way we measure it. But I don't see Bitcoin in dollar amounts. I see Bitcoin in Bitcoin
But
amounts.
it would determine what you can get with it.
Yes, because everyone uses fiat still.
So
But
you're
let's
saying
say,
it would
yeah,
only have its own value in the future. But in other words, if you're saying, fine, still people still use fiat, that's what we use to measure it.
Mhm.
But what would have to happen over the next month or year or decade
Hello.
for it to take on its own value? I mean, what? How would you value? How would it be?
That's a good question.
Thank you.
Well, I don't know. This is something in the future I just can't tell. But I can tell you this. I transact in Bitcoin quite often. And a lot of the times, not always, in fact, not often, sometimes people ask me, hey, I want 0.01 Bitcoin for this. They won't say, I want $1,000 or $100. They'll say, I want 0.01 Bitcoins.
Right.
Not 0.1356, whatever. They want that much amount. Some people do treat it as a form of money, and they stick by that. So, and I think it's a matter of adoption. I think more and more as time goes on, we'll see more and more of that.
I
To
think
what
we
scale
are
and how
seeing
long,
that.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But from my experience using it, yes, you're right. People do trade it still. You know, they value it in dollars. If they say, hey, I need $100 in Bitcoin, they'll send you the equivalent value. Yes,
Of course, yeah.
that's just because that's the standard at the
That's
moment.
currently how it is.
Yes.
I take your point, but and if you don't mind giving an example of what you buy with
Sure.
for 0.01, what did you buy?
Well, I have, for example, I know some people from India who, are very good video editors, soft developers, and so on, which I've worked with in the past. Because I've done entrepreneur things in the past. That's kind of how I got into Bitcoin. Because to transact with them, you can't just send them PayPal or bank transfer. A lot of the time, cryptocurrencies are the way to go. And primarily, the best one is Bitcoin. That's the most used one. So that's how I got into it. And there have been times people say, I want this amount of Bitcoin. I don't want the dollar value. I want this amount of Bitcoin.
Totally, I get where you're coming from. Now,
It's a small minority, I admit, but it's becoming more and more. Yes,
I think
exactly.
you're
Yeah.
right. Yeah, I agree with you on that. But those services, just give me a rough ballpark figure of how much you paid for one of these services in Bitcoin.
It ranges between maybe small as $100 to as big as
No,
$2,000
in Bitcoin.
in Bitcoin. Yeah.
No, but how much would it have costed in Bitcoin?
Oh, you mean like in the
Yeah, the
Bitcoin
actual-
value? Okay.
Just as an example.
Okay,
so I
it's a
know.
ballpark between 0.01 and 0.10,
Okay,
around
good.
there. Could be less, could be more.
I'll use that range as an example then.
Sure.
So,
But it depends as well because let's say I did it 5 years ago.
uh,
0. Well, yes, yeah, no, I
going
admit.
to, yes.
I do admit that we are, a lot of, let's say Bitcoin doubles in price. They're going to be asking for, a little less or a little more Bitcoin. Yes,
Right,
I admit.
because if what you paid for with 0.01 Bitcoin
Mhm.
was, like you said, the equivalent of $2,000,
Yes.
right? If Bitcoin lost its value relative to fiat,
Yep.
then they wouldn't ask you for 0.01. They'd be asking you for 0.1 or maybe even 1. I mean, depending on how.
There's a good chance they would. Yes.
Yeah, so I can't see how it could ever escape that system of being valued against. Not even just. I remember I talked to someone here, and they said
Yeah.
you don't need to measure it in terms of fiat. What about goods like
Mm.
houses?
Mm.
But you see, a house derives its value in fiat form as well.
Yeah.
So until the day where houses could be bought with crypto,
Yeah.
Bitcoin in this case,
Yeah.
and somehow crypto had escaped being valued against fiat, that's the only way. But I can't see how that could happen.
Well, so my honest answer is I don't know how that will happen. Don't know if
You
it
believe
ever
it
will
will?
happen.
Oh,
It
okay.
might. It might not.
Right.
For me, it's a form of currency. Maybe the dollar will still be and always will be the reserve currency of the world.
Yeah.
But I still believe that this will be the best form of money regardless, and I will continue to use it. And yes, I will probably use the dollar as a way to figure out how much things are worth because everyone else does. But for example, before 1971, everyone measured money in gold.
Sure.
You know, paper notes used to be receipts for gold.
Quick question:
Yes.
was that for every single currency, or are we talking about the dollar?
So gold was the standard. The dollar was the reserve currency, and then you had pounds, yen, which were kind of like I don't know. I can't remember exactly what it is, but the dollar was the reserve currency. Pounds and yen were backed by dollars, and dollars were backed by gold. It kind of worked like that. And everyone back then would measure things in gold, ounces of gold. That's the way it was. And dollars and so on were just receipts, were just a way of transferring that amount much easier way, because it's in paper, it's not as heavy, transfer much easier. And in 1971, they managed to drop that standard, and now everything is measured in dollars. That's the bottom line, dollars. Before it used to be gold, now it's dollars. So it can happen. It has happened before. How it will happen, I couldn't tell you. If I'm being honest, I couldn't tell you how it will happen. I'm not a crazy economist. I don't know the future of the banking world and all that. So
Neither should the economists.
yeah,
But on the gold question, even
Yeah.
before 1971,
Yeah.
gold's value fluctuated.
Yes.
It wasn't stable.
Yeah.
And obviously, fluctuations could have been to do with anything.
Yeah.
But those fluctuations were measured in its currency value. Because it's not like the world changed that radically in 1971 to the point where gold
Sure, yeah,
itself
it was
changes the way it's measured in terms of its value. I mean, it still was something based on how much money. If I had a whole block of gold, I'm interested in how much money that's going to get me.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So,
Well, so before 1971, for the most part, gold was on par with the dollar and with the pound. There was not much fluctuation. Everything was in gold, and it wasn't like 1 ounce of gold was worth more one time, was worth less another. That only happened temporarily during the Napoleon Wars, the World Wars, and so on, where you had a slight dip or uprise in value. I don't know exactly, but otherwise it was fully on par with gold. It wasn't the case where it would be worth less or more because gold was the money. Gold was money.
yeah.
Notes were just receipts.
Obviously, well, the dollar would have to be, if it was pegged to gold, then
Yeah.
obviously it would change with the value of gold.
Yeah.
My question was about the value of gold prior to the currency, if that makes sense. So if for some reason in some year, sometime
Yeah.
before 1971, there's a huge increase in popularity of gold ornaments in homes,
Yeah.
the value of gold would go up.
Pre 1971, you mean? Yeah.
But it still would.
Yeah.
Because gold, like I said, hasn't changed.
Sure.
If suddenly there's a great need for gold, in the same way there's a great need for
Yeah.
cobalt or
Yeah.
coltan at the moment, that would. It's not as if it would have increased in value in fiat terms because more people want to buy and sell gold for not just to peg the dollar, but now to build or whatever. So you
Right.
see what I'm saying? So
But pre 1971,
Yeah.
before the gold standard dropped, during medieval times and all that, they didn't have dollars or yen. They had gold. They had gold coins. This is
Sure,
how it
yeah.
worked. If someone needed more gold, it would make gold more valuable, sure, but
Yes.
that was a medium of exchange. Everyone used gold as a medium of exchange.
But my example was if it went up in value not as the medium of exchange, but simply as a resource or a material used
Yeah.
in building.
Yeah.
So that in itself would change the value of in its money terms.
Yeah. If you put it against other assets, let's say property, food, whatnot, whatever they traded and bartered during medieval ages, yes, it would go up in value. So I see where you're coming from. I think a good analogy is comparing it to gold. Back then, you literally had gold coins. That's the way people transacted because you could melt it, reuse it, whatever. And yes, if let's say a king hoarded loads of gold and then there's less supply in the world,
Right.
it became more valuable. Sure, you needed less gold coins to buy a certain food or buy a cow or whatnot. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it'll be the same thing with Bitcoin in that sense.
Interesting.
I mean, that's how I like to see it. I don't know, obviously. I don't know these things, but it's a similar analogy. There was no fiat. There was no dollar or yen or pound to compare it to. Yes.
Well, that was my question, really.
It's a great question, actually. I haven't heard that one before, and I'm sorry I didn't get a perfect answer for it, but
No,
that's the best way I would see it.
no, I don't think there is a perfect answer, really.
Mm.
But so far, I do see it as just another commodity. In the same way that houses are.
Sure, yeah.
Houses are measured by, large financial institutions, by
Yeah.
the government, as being a major part of the wealth in the world.
Yes.
Not just money, but the value of a home. But it's always, my point is that it's always measured in money.
Yes.
We have no other.
That's because we define money in fiat is the money we define today. But that might not be true 100 years from now.
But I can't see how Bitcoin would take on its own value, its own inherent value. Because I know, look, money itself doesn't have inherent value, right? If we want to get more philosophical.
Yeah.
So
today's money doesn't, in my opinion.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I'm only trying to say that I can't see how Bitcoin would ever be anything other than just another form of money.
Mm-hmm.
It's no different from money, if you see what I mean.
I think I see where you're coming from. It's just.
Obviously, you're trying to say there's more security and so on. That's certainly true. Yeah.
So the dollar. So if you go on exchange and it says $90,000 for a Bitcoin, that's just the exchange rate for a Bitcoin. You could flip it around and say, oh, $1 costs you 0.0001 Bitcoin. There might be a time. I mean, I don't know. We're thinking, hypotheticals.
It would be like a reversal.
Exactly.
Like a magnetic pole shift.
Exactly. Where all of a sudden everything is compared against Bitcoin.
Yeah, well,
because people find out, realize, and adopt it as the reserve currency. That would be the case. Right now, it's the dollar. Most things are traded against the dollar. We have other currencies, obviously, but most things are traded against the dollar because it is globally believed and perceived that it is the safest, strongest asset, form of money, rather. But maybe that will flip one day.
That definitely will.
I think it will. Will it be Bitcoin? I think so, but it might not be. We'll see.
I'll catch you in about 100 years here, and we'll see if you're right.
We'll have a chat. Take care, man.
Good talking to you.
What was your name again?
Darren.
Darren, lovely to meet you. Take care.
I'll probably see you another.
Yes, take care.